Welcome to the UDR podcast. This is the recovery portion of the podcast. I'm here with my good friend Jesse P. It's been a little while since I had him on the first video podcast. It's like a big event.
Yeah.
Having Jesse P on here.
Yeah.
Seeing his face instead
Seeing
of
my
a
face.
little fucking emoji.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I liked it, was a little emoji.
I'm sure that's how most people liked it.
Yeah, I'm sure. So we were chatting before the podcast, and so maybe we'll keep that conversation going. That seemed to be pretty good.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just, just for our listeners, I like to say, live from the recovery capital of Canada, I really do believe that Calgary's recovery level is super high. We have great recovery here. Wherever I go work and try to help, First Nations or wherever I go to try to help people and inspire them, I want them to come to Calgary because I think we really got it going on here. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been out east. We worked, different parts of the West. I mean, anybody who says that the program is the same all over the country, I'd say doesn't really know too much about the program in its book form.
Roger.
Right? Now, from a fellowship standpoint, from a, philosophically comforted standpoint, then sure. Yeah. I mean, you'll run into people that, will make you feel philosophically comforted, but not from a solution-based, you need to hear what you need to hear actually and what you need to do. You'll find that here.
And when you say the solution-based and you talk about the book, and we're referring to the 12 steps here in this portion of our conversation, what do you mean when you say solution-based? Or what's the recipe for high-level recovery?
Well, I mean, I would say, obviously, the book, The 12 Steps. But I think that that's like your general, that's the base, that's the blueprint, right? When I actually mean solution, I mean practical application of that book, practical application of those steps, and experience of that practical application. A little bit of what it was like before, what it was like too, and the struggles to that application, and now what it's like a couple years given that application, experience of that application. That's really more what I mean from a deeper level. I think, any individual can, recite some things from the book. I think it's when you could take that literature, you could put it into a working conversation where you don't even know that I'm really referring to the book, minus a couple of words that you can't get away from. That's the tell, right? Is you could be having a conversation. You could have the ability to work that literature into a conversation. But then there's going to be a couple of old school 1930s words that are thrown into that conversation that'll give you away, right?
Yeah.
Minus that, I mean, for the most part, and that could be a full conversation with concepts, with main concepts from chapters that are needed in that conversation, whatever suits the conversation. You could still have a pretty lengthy conversation without those words, and it is the mastery of kind of even getting away from those words. Some you can't, though. Sometimes that whole piece, that whole concept actually hinges on a couple of those old school words. You can't get away from it.
You've pretty much had that take right from almost day one, or at least in the first while of your recovery. You propose the idea and to your sponsees that you should be able to talk the program or the literature in a way that's general, where you're not using the words or the definitions of the book itself, where it's just a general way, right? And you've really taken that, and you still teach that, correct?
Yeah, I do still teach that. I firmly believe in that, but that's not my own idea. Truthfully, that's right out of working with others on the first meet.
Yeah.
Right? We suggest you do this as we have done on more about alcoholism.
Yeah.
And they say don't refer to the book. So this is to say that you have enough knowledge of the literature to be able to bring in at least that chapter into the conversation, right? And I firmly believe that, but I believe obviously the whole book, and that's what I've been working towards for a long time.
And I've kind of taken a bit of a different track. I've always kind of went to the book, but I think the difference between 1939 and today is the people around, well, many of them, and then I sponsor guys who aren't like wet typically, so they've been around the book. So that's probably why I refer to the book, or that's why I quote the book. That's why I go like, in the book it says or whatever. And a lot of these guys are real receptive. They don't push away. But I do work like in other places now, like out of town, First Nations communities, various cities, and doing different things. And these people have no idea of recovery. They have no idea of any 12-step program. They've never seen recovery. And you better know that I got to use a general way of speaking. If I start talking about like any 12-step fellowship or even the word God or anything, right? It's like, psh, they're done.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I like, though.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that any, like, you see me with a big book without the jacket and you believe that it's a Bible. Like, that's more my experience, and that kind of not disdain, but a little bit of hesitation. I see that more than I think I've seen the latter. I mean, to be able to quote the book and pull out other literature, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with that style for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, especially early on, I would refer to the book, just not knowing. And then, like the first couple of years trying to recite something, and then you get hung up on a word or you miss a word, and then you're not able to recite it in your own words, and the whole thing can kind of fall apart. And, like in a share or even, in sponsorship, right? And now you got to go back to the book. And so I probably referred to the book maybe the first 3 years or so.
Yeah.
And some pieces are retained and some pieces I've lost.
Yeah.
But I find as long as I stay in the literature, I could always recite it, honestly.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about step one a little bit. I go to quite a few meetings still. I don't work with a lot of like wet alcoholics, and by wet alcoholics we mean somebody that's new. And they're still like in active addiction pretty much, but they're looking for some type of help. I don't work with a ton of those people much anymore, and it has been a long time. A lot of the people that I get are, they've been sober a while, or they're looking for some spiritual, leveling up, or maybe I'll get a chronic relapse, or that's maybe wet, but that's kind of what happens for me. So, but I do go to a lot of meetings. And when we see powerlessness, or we talk about powerlessness, still, the main idea in the rooms and the sharing is I put the drink in my body and then I'm powerless. And that's like across the board, no matter where I go to meetings, that's the main premise, right? And when you look in the literature, it actually combats that everywhere in the literature, and that's not the crux of the problem. Why do you think that is still prevalent in the meetings everywhere, that the main problem is the allergy, and that's actually what the powerlessness is? Why do you think that?
Well, it's easier. I
understand.
Well, no, it's just easier. Like, it's easier like it might be easier to understand, but if that's my problem, it's easier to solve. I actually don't drink and go to meetings. Right. But, many pleasant other rationalizations, right, would have to go the way of many pleasant other rationalizations at the end of 6. And so, if you look at, if dishonesty is in regards to the drink, and that is the crux of the problem, right? And I understand that, the dishonesty has the ability to bleed. It's just not simply characterized in the drinking. It permeates all my other affairs. That's a much bigger problem, and that causes me to work for a long time, a lifetime of work, checks and balances. So which is easier, a lifetime of work on a lot of shit that an individual, male or female, aren't really willing to work on it. If you look at men, right out of the gate, they have to start working on the sex relations. With women, right out of the gate, they have to start working on relationships, codependency. And that, without the spiritual solution, that's a pretty good crux for a little bit of time. That's a pretty good crutch, right? And so which is easier? I come in, I just don't drink and go to meetings. and my sex conduct is run rampant, right? And so the actual problem is the same in both situations. It's dishonesty into the drink, and it's dishonesty in the sex relations, right? And I go out and I drink after, let's say, 8 months or a year, and I could do this for a decade, right? Still thinking it's the drink, not knowing it's dishonesty, not knowing that it's actually dishonesty twice. The sex conduct's always going to be kind of in the shadows.
So for somebody new that comes in and tries to wrap their head around that idea, and the first they've ever heard of it is probably from the sponsor, maybe somebody drops that little nugget in a meeting, which they don't even understand. So it comes from the sponsor. How long have you noticed that it kind of takes somebody to wrap their head around that they lie to themselves, that it's the dishonesty?
Sometimes they never get it, rigorously honest, right?
Yeah.
But the sell is not, you're going to be dishonest in your career, finances, health, relationships, and reputation. The sell is you are currently dishonest in regards to the drink. That is the biggest problem. That's what this individual is going to understand. So that's the main sell. That's also the sell on God, and then from there, we could really, once you get into kind of more 6 and 7, 10, 11, and 12, mainly 6 and 7 and 10, then you're able to kind of sell, the dishonesty being in these other affairs. And even then, it's theoretical until he actually gets repercussions from that.
So through the one, as a sponsor, you're really highlighting the sell of the dishonesty with the drink, and then you bring that back into play later when we're talking about defective character, but hammering that home through the one and then over time with the defective character.
Yeah. Like I don't chat any further than the drink and the drug.
Yeah.
I also don't give them a window. The book doesn't give them a window on the spiritual solution.
Yeah.
So none of that's talked about.
Yeah.
It is strictly you're fucked with the substance.
Yeah.
And you're not getting away from that. So.
And you're still hard and fast lines on that, eh?
Extremely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've just seen it work so many times. Like that's how a lot of these guys have got it.
Yeah.
Under me. And it's not like I made anything up. That's just the way the book is structured.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Why do you think that I've been successful doing it the way that I do it?
Because you work with retreads. Retreads aren't different. I mean, at the end of the day, the man needs the same information. He just needs it in different, not styles, but like right now if I take a wet alcoholic, right, and I attack the defective character right out of the gate, no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You take a retread. You start talking to him. Because like even, again, let me back up a little bit because I don't actually... The alcoholic I don't attack with the drink and the drug, really. It is, at the end of the day, the spirituality. He understands the spirituality in like a base form. Like this guy has absolutely lost all. And that's actually why he's feeling that way, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Like he's feeling discontent because the wife just left him, so he thinks. Right? If we actually look into it, this thing's been there the whole time. So that's that. But that's like we're targeting that because that's the siren song to these guys. Because you could be working with a heroin addict, you could be working with, a meth head, whatever, and you might not have experience with those drugs. And so if you hit them from the substance, you're not going to be able to actually hit him. And I mean, past all the surface, past how's the weather, did you like that meeting, past all that, and like right to something, like the fiber of this man's being. And that is the spirituality, unlike anything. It is a siren song, right? So that's the wet guy. Well, when you deal with the retread, like he understands that very fucking well. He understands that because, like, under his recovery, he might have been able to get somewhere in the consciousness of pride, right? He might own his own restaurant. He might whatever. He actually might be okay materially, but spiritually, dude, like, this guy's going to fucking blow his brains out. Like, he's not, like, why doesn't my insides match my outsides? And that's a different tact. We're not talking about the substance. This guy's been sober for 10 years, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So That's why I think you're successful is the premise is still the same, which is the spirituality in the defective character.
Yeah.
It just unlocks. For me, the reveal is 6. For you, the reveal is right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Because they haven't used the substance in 10 years, 5 years, whatever the case may be.
And honestly, when I take a wet guy through, I'm not talking about all defective character. I'm sticking to the basics of the alcohol or the drug step 1. I'm not talking like there's a line in, the doctor's opinion where it says we work out our solution on the spiritual and altruistic plane. With a retread, I'm hammering that home, and there's a half an hour conversation that's coming with that little line. We work out our solution to life on the spiritual and altruistic plane. What do those mean? And then we and I might even open up the window of the book further up to kind of grab something and say, this is what this is saying. A nugget piece. But with the new guy, I'm reading that. I'm going to just highlight, this is what this says. It's actually, that's the solution to your life. And I move on, right? Because they're not going to get it. And they never do get it, especially at first, right? So a lot of these pieces that I do with a retread, I never do with a new guy. With somebody who just wants to level up, it's a totally different ball game too. It's almost like 3 different phases of sponsorship that I would do: the wet alcoholic, the retread, and then just a full spiritual level up is something different in itself. Then another thing that I found about that 3rd level is, there's a lot of spiritual pride that you can find in wanting to level up, right? And that spiritual pride can actually block a person from leveling up, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Kind of switching a little bit of gears here, back to step 1, and the real problem being, the crux of the problem is I can't not put the first one in, right? How long does it take the new guy to get that?
How long does it take the new guy to understand the crux of the problem?
The main problem centers in his mind. It's the spiritual malady. It's his inability to leave it alone, the blank spot, blah, blah, blah.
I'd say more about alcoholism by Fred's story, at the least.
Yeah.
If not by Jim's story. Halfway through, there's a solution. And the latter half, that's pretty comprehensive. We get into Roller and Hazard's story, which I think is good.
Yeah.
And it explains it pretty good with the plausible excuses. But then when you go to Jim's story, it gives you exactly what it looks like.
Suddenly.
With the whiskey and the milk, so the thought of the drink, and then a plausible or an insane excuse afterwards can't hurt me on a full stomach.
Right.
And once those 2 pieces are talked about like that, then this guy's just like, that's my life right there. That's how I've done it. So once he understands that in regards to the drink, you could always refer back to that, because that's how it looks in every other area. Mm-hmm. That's how it looks for
the defective character and not dishonesty bleeding into all
everything, dude. It's a thought and a plausible or an insane and trivial excuse. I think, they all look plausible for sure. Mm-hmm. I'm sure even to Jim that looked plausible. Mm-hmm. Really, how you could tell, though, is like, if you get called out on it, are you going to tell the truth? Mm-hmm. So let's say I'm Jim. I end up going off on a 3-month spree, and I come back, and somebody says, Jess, you're doing so well. You were sober for a couple weeks, whatever, couple months. You ended up going out. What happened? And I'm going to say, well, listen, I went to a roadside place where they have a bar. Decided I'd get a sandwich, and run them down and say, I ordered some whiskey and some milk and it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. The odds are he's going to say, well, actually, the wife was cheating on me. And, I found out that the business that I once owned is actually going under. And, this guy who's been embezzling money. You're going to find some excuses that have a certain amount of plausibility to be able to justify that spree. That's how you could really tell the difference between the insane and trivial and the plausible excuse. But one thing I wanted to bring up, actually, because we were just chatting about the different types. This is something I haven't done actually in quite some time, but I was curious if you still do it. Do you still re-strengthen steps?
What do you mean?
So there was a time in early recovery, probably, the first 3 to 4 years, where me and you would go in and re-strengthen steps. So we actually would keep the base structure together. We wouldn't do a 5 with them. We would actually start with 6, 7, and 10. Do you remember that? Do you still do that?
No.
What an interesting concept that was.
Yeah. What I do now is, let's say I'm going to strengthen steps, as you just put it. Everybody thinks the deal's step 3, okay? I try to show them that the deal isn't actually step 3. I'll systematically dissect the step 3 prayer against the step 7 prayer. And you know the difference of that prayer, right? One is an offering, and at the end of the step 3 prayer, it says, "May I do thy will." And I'm a stickler for definitions, and the word may I means possibility. So this is just a possibility, right? In step 3 also, it says, when we sincerely took the position, or this concept was the new and triumphant arch which we passed through to freedom. So it's a concept only, this decision that we make. Concept is only an idea. An idea is nothing. It's like the frog sitting on the log. He has the idea to jump, but if he doesn't jump, there's nothing happens. So when we sincerely take the position, that is actually the action of step 3. But that action of step 3, it really is a manifestation of building your step 7. It's a manifesting of your step 6, trying to learn how to turn it over through the pain, but you're willing to keep trying. And then I bust out the step 7 prayer, and I look at the difference between 3 and 7. I'm like, the 7 says, "My Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me. I'm willing now. This isn't just an offering. I'm willing. You have all of me, the good and the bad. I now pray that you remove from me every single defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. I'm asking, Creator, to remove these things so I can help your kids, God. Grant me strength as I go from here." That's firm. Grant me your strength as I go from here. Statement, to do your bidding. And the word bidding means I listen to you. And if God is love, I listen to love. I listen to you, God, love. And I'm a spearhead for your ever-advancing creation of love. And it also means surrender in an overly slavish way. Overly slavish means without original thought or idea. Amen. Contract. So when you look at step 6, which is kind of step 3 in action, I'm offering, I'm trying, and I'm trying really hard. And eventually I get to this level of surrender, which is to me the step 7 surrender. And I'm willing to serve Creator. And to me, that's like, what did you say at the beginning? Restructuring the steps, or that's revamping their decision in 3 to understand what 6 and 7 really are, so that 7 becomes the focal point. How does 7 even become the focal point? Boom, move up to step 10. It's the practically applied mechanics of step 10, over and over and over and over. But most people don't want to do it like willingly. Step 10's a grudgingly done step for a long time. Some people never even take it to the full extent.
I'd say most.
And part of that is because the rooms give a misconstrued version of what 10 is. It's either the nightly inventory or you promptly admit that you're wrong. So the information in the rooms on a general spectrum is false. But when you really understand the 10, most people don't really want to do the 10 because they're not getting what they want, bro. I'm in lust, or I'm in this new relationship, and I don't want to tell anybody. The dishonesty right there, selfishness. And so they never get the effect. They're not building the character, so they never really surrender. And so they still fight a lot. They still fight everything and everyone. And humility isn't something to be desired. It takes most of us a long fucking time. But it doesn't have to take a long time. Through the mechanics of 10, the surrender of step 11 becomes, it comes. And the other thing about 10 is when you're seeking humility, there's a lot of pain in the 10, which is like 6. But if you keep at it, it just becomes a working part of your mind. It becomes a way of life. That's what step 7 is to me. And then you're not even, step 10 it's not even a thing anymore, really, because you're living step 10. It's not like, oh, fuck, I got to make this call. Oh, shit, I got to make that call again. Oh, shit, I got to do inventory. No, you've come over the hump. You don't need to be bludgeoned and beaten. The most profound result of all was their change in their attitude towards God. That's a profound change when everything is your teacher and everything's your lesson and you're trying to be the best character that you can. Of course, step 10, like out of the 12 and 12 types of inventory, is still part of daily life. You know, long-standing inventory, even the spot check inventory, all of those different type of inventories that he mentions in the 10, they're still part of that way of life of 7. But through that surrender, that's where step 11 really amplifies, right?
And so when you revamp, you start at the 3 and you were trying to get essentially a step 7 surrender.
Yes.
And then you're looking for that 7 surrender to be able to properly be humbled to do 10. I technically 8, 9, because you do need the actual humility.
Yeah, 8 and 9.
Starting in those 2 steps, but without some sort of humility, there is no 10, 11, and 12.
Right. And to me, it's that willingness, right? Like in step 6, any person capable of enough willingness and honesty to try repeatedly step 6 on all his faults without reservation has indeed come a long way spiritually. That's essentially what we're trying to get them to produce in the 10.
Yeah.
That's why step 10 in the first few years is mostly step 6, that kind of willingness and trying repeatedly and trying to be honest, trying to grow in the image and likeness of our Creator. But like it says in step 10, the best possible attitude, right? And then eventually you come over this hump and then there's way more of a surrender and you're in the flow of a different way. And to me, that's a step 7 surrender. And that's kind of the goal of the program. To me, a step 7 surrender is you've surrendered to all of the program. You've surrendered to changing your character. You've surrendered to service. And I really believe through the practice of 10, like this is how this conversation started today. We were out in the foyer in the green room, I guess you could call it, in my studio, talking about what step 10 does for step 11. Most people don't understand the step 10. So if step 11 has a ceiling of, let's say, 0 to 100, most people, because they don't do the step 10 or they don't know what step 10 is, the ceiling of a step 11 is like 10 points out of a total of 100. But if you understand 10 and you keep that channel clear, that unlimited, infinite ceiling of step 11, let's say 100 and beyond, it's infinite. And you can pull on this power because the power is real, but the power is only real if you're practicing the 10 without reservation. That's the other thing. When I said in step 7, it talks about to surrender in an overly slavish way without original thought or idea. That's like surrendering without any thought or idea. That's without reservation. That's kind of like seeking and doing God's will at the highest level. That's what step 10 can take you to, and then step 11 just enhances that. And as that happens, I believe, because we remove so much of self, and we're designed, I think we're conditioned for selfishness, but we're wired to serve, that the natural course of path is to serve, which is what step 12 is all about. And if you do proper 10s and 11s, the natural way that this goes is you serve, because that's how we're wired, and you move away the things out of your 10 that are blocking you. We seek through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for his knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry out step 6 and 7, 8 and 9, worked in the 10, and then eventually you're serving, because that's how humans are. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I think we've chatted about a lot of this kind of stuff. I mean, I'd take it a little bit further though, because as we were chatting, you're talking about kind of my ideas on it. And I think that we have chatted about this a couple of times, but you know, the alcoholic is they're extremes from one extreme to the other extreme. And so especially when you're even when I'm dealing with retreads, but especially with new guys, I mean, there's no real opening, right? So for example, when it comes to pride, absolutely all pride is bad. There's no conversations of any sort of positive pride. That's like one end of the spectrum, right? And you don't want to entertain anything shy of that. And so, you know, with 10, without doing proper 10s, like, you know, a guy calls me and he says, Jess, you know, haven't been doing so well. He's a 12-step member. He says, you know, what are your thoughts? I say, well, where are your 10s? And if he says, oh, you know, they're kind of here and there, you know, I've made a couple calls, then I know that actually the whole thing's shot, right? He might be sponsoring guys, right? But I know that 11 is done. I don't give it 10%. I don't give it 20%. Right. I give it 0, right? And quite often, well, like, that's what it is, right? Or he'll say, you know, 10s aren't bad, and I'm praying, right? And so when he says praying, he's meaning 11. You know, when I chat to my guys about 11, I don't want to entertain really, I don't want them to say prayer to me. I want them to say meditation to me. In the steps, I mean, you know, we have prayer going back to 3. It's not a new concept. That's not what's new here. What's new is meditation, right? And so as per the directions, we're using the prayer to guide that meditation. So that's what I want them to get focused on. But you could absolutely forget that if the channel's not clear, right? And so when you're talking about, you know, 6, I mean, that is obviously that's probably one of the largest parts about that step. Where I cap that off is I do the 7 deadly sins, and that's out of 4 12 by 12. Say, let's take a universally known kind of list of defects. And as soon as I read that years and years ago, I love that. Because you remember in the houses, they're giving you a list of 250 defects of character, and just absolutely, let's just, you know, let's just drown you in self. Right? No, dominated by thoughts of yourself after that 250 defects. Or you could do 7 deadly sins, and then you could cap it up and just call that selfishness. Right? But the dishonesty, it's the selfishness and the dishonesty. The dishonesty is actually where I spend most of my time with guys in that.
And like you pointed this out to me years ago, there's no aspect for that in the 10, right? There's no mechanical operation for the dishonesty, which is why it's so important to talk to somebody immediately. And the inventory also produces some of the honesty, right? So
yeah, but like, why didn't you call me?
Yeah.
You know, so you called me to get, you know, an idea of what I thought about this situation. Don't hear from you for 3 weeks. We have a chat. You did that move. You didn't call me before you made the move. That's really the dishonesty. I tell a majority of the guys, dude, as long as you call, like that's probably one of the biggest things. That's probably one of the biggest things. You know, 12-step member going through the 12 steps, you make that call. And it is going to be, you know, buying that new car, and it is going to be getting into that relationship, and it is going to be a lot of those things.
So you would like your guys to talk about all different aspects of life, whatever's going on in their life kind of deal, right? Whether it's like, hey, I'm thinking about buying a new car, or I'm thinking about, you know, maybe quitting my job and getting a new one, or I'm thinking about, you know, leaving my wife for this other girl and, you know, moving away, or, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, my physical health. Like, you're a well-rounded sponsor that wants your guys to bring these things to you, correct?
Yeah. And that's, you know, that's outlined in the 3 chapters. That's going to be crux of the problem on that we hammer that home, is that the dishonesty bleeds into all other areas of your life.
I agree.
Right.
And I love that, because when you look at the 12 steps, the first principle is honesty in the first step. And if your first step in this path of 12 steps, or let's say life, if your first step is dishonest, the step is crooked. And the further you climb up this ladder, the more crooked you are, or the more you build on a foundation of dishonesty, the more crooked this is. And eventually you get so high up that thing's going to fall over.
Yeah.
And it will fall over. It always does fall over somehow, some way, right? It may not always result in the drink, but it results in a lot of pain and a lot of ripple effect of harming people.
Yeah, I mean, the dishonesty, that's the biggest thing. Once that starts to set in, then, I mean, I could pinpoint. We were just actually chatting about this the last meeting me and you went to. We were chatting about a certain member and a dishonest motive that he had, and he's been on a run for years. You know, there's a lot of guys that have gone out under me or have died that I could pinpoint with almost, you know, not so much all of them off the top of my head. That'd be crazy. But when I see them, I could pinpoint it. I'm like, yeah, 2-3 years ago, that move, that woman, that job, that car. I mean, it is funny because in the material world, I find that that's actually probably one of the more common ones, right? Opposite sex. And the data doesn't even compare, as me and you have chatted multiple times. You know, if the guy does, and this is like the gray area. So this is like understands the problem, solutions God, this gray area. And the dishonesty can live in that for decades, really. You know, and that will come out in the opposite sex. And that's like, I mean, I'd say maybe 87%. Then I would say career being 10%.
Women relationships.
Oh, like that's the opposite sex.
Yeah.
I'm saying the opposite sex is 87%. That's what's going to happen. That he's going to go toward that before he actually goes to God.
Yeah.
Then I would say career would be 10%. And then I would say the world of the material, 3%. And mainly the world of the material is cars. That's what I find. Where it's like, you know, that's like the only real asset he could buy. It's not really an asset. But like that's one thing that would change his life and cost X amount of dollars. And, you know, it's actually probably one of the easiest things he could point to that's going to, you know, elevate his status as far as he's concerned. And so buying a, you know, used $5,000 black on black BMW, so he does, right? So he goes to that choice.
Seen that once or twice in our careers, eh?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We'll get back to the podcast in a second. The opinions expressed on this podcast are solely of the guest sharing or myself. We have no affiliation with any 12-step or recovery program. And if you do like our work, please consider visiting BILLWARDLIFE and supporting what we do. Now back to the podcast. It's real funny because you know me and you've seen me drive these humility vehicles for many, many years, eh? And you know, for good reason, right? I really needed that humility. And I remember, I think it was about 4 years in, I was working for a friend of ours. We were both working there, and I was finally making some money and finally got part of my career back, and things were looking up in that career area. And I went and bought that Mustang, and before I made that purchase, and I think it was 4 or 5 years sober, before I made the purchase, I called like 4 pillars. And I said, hey, this is the car that I'm thinking of buying. I was actually thinking about buying an Intrepid or some other car. I can't remember. And then this one just kind of came out of the blue, and it only had like just under 100,000 kilometers. It had a sunroof, and it had like brand new tires, and it was a beautiful Mustang, man, 2-door. And I was like kind of like drooling to get this thing, but I knew that I couldn't do it without talking to the pillars. And then I talked to all my pillars, and they kind of green lighted everything. So I bought it, right? I only drove that thing for about 6 or 8 months, and my daughters loved it. And then sure enough, where we worked, they ran into some financial difficulty, and they couldn't pay me. And I had heavy child support bills, and I needed to pay my child support the day I was getting paid. And I couldn't pay my child support, and I was losing it. But I didn't lose it. Like, I didn't lose it like I used to. I was losing it for a moment, and I was just like, okay. I breathed in, I breathed out. I went to my desk, and I just kind of meditated for a minute. Probably 5 minutes, I just meditated. Boom, the thought came, sell the car. And you know what? It wasn't even a question. Within half an hour, I had that car listed on Kijiji. And within a half an hour, an old sponsee of yours actually called me, and he lent me the money for the child support. And then I paid him back a couple days later when I sold the car.
With the car.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, in retrospect, you know, rear-wheel drive V8, in Calgary.
in the winter.
Just a goofy move.
Yeah, dude.
You had to put, what'd you put, cinder blocks in the back? I remember that.
Yeah. Well, sidewalk blocks.
Just goofy.
Remember that day we were cruising and you're like, hey, have you pressed this button for the, what was the locking the rear axle or something?
It was the traction. I said, take it off. Press it off. I'm like, gun it.
And I gunned it.
Yeah,
I was
you
like,
did.
Whoa, fuck, it almost crashed.
That was good. Yeah, that was a cool car, man. That was a cool car. I mean, the thing that was neat about that car is that, you know, it was desirable enough that you'd be able to burn it. You didn't lose any money off that.
No, I didn't. No, I did okay.
So that was a good situation because...
But then I went right to, Suzuki.
Oh, no, dude. That was the Sorrento.
What did I get right
It was
after
the
that?
ugliest automobile I think you've ever owned. That was the early 2000s. You had an early 2000s silver Kia.
Oh, yeah.
Kia
that-
Sorrento.
Kia Sorrento.
My God, that thing was brutal. That was the worst. And I mean, you had some bangers,
Yeah.
but that was the absolute ugliest.
Yeah.
My favorite, I think, was that red Ford
Yeah, I hated
6-cylinder.
Yeah, I hated 6 cylinders. I hated Fords. I hated red trucks, and I hated 2-wheel drives. And I got exactly what I hated.
That was her. That was the longest. I think that was the longest vehicle you had. You had that. You were whipping around in that thing for years.
Yeah, a few years. Yeah, I gave it to another old timer.
Yeah,
Once
yeah.
I was done with it,
That thing's still running.
it was running good when I gave it away.
That's gone now.
Remember when we in early recovery we took that truck out to Cranbrook and
hit
we
that
hit
deer.
that deer,
Yeah, yeah.
but there was no deer.
Yeah, no damage, no nothing. It was Ghost Bambi.
Ghost Bambi.
Yeah, I do remember that.
That
I'm
was-
surprised. In looking back, I'm surprised that thing made it, man. Surprised that truck made it. That was what, a 5-hour drive, 4 or 5-hour drive.
Listening to Joe and Charlie on CDs.
Yeah. That was early. Hey,
Yeah, that was.
how long were you sober at that point? Maybe 3 years at best. 2 years probably. I was probably
2 years.
I was probably
2
about a
years.
year, maybe a little, because I think you're a year ahead of me.
I want to switch some gears here.
Yep.
Reminiscing is good.
Well, we could do that off the pod.
I want to talk a little bit about. I'm going to do a series. I'm going to do a series on families. Okay, I'm going to do a 10-part series. I think it's a 10-part. I'm in talks with my coordinator right now about putting together this video series and going to be like a 10-part. Blah blah blah. We're kind of laying it out, but I want to talk to you about the family. Not so much like the chapter, the family afterwards, although you can discuss whatever you want if it's in your mind about that chapter. And why this kind of came up is I did a podcast or a video probably 3 years ago, and I put it on my YouTube channel, and it's called The Misunderstanding of Addiction or something to do with the family. I can't really remember which episode it was. But one of the treatment centers that I help Northern BC up in Prince Rupert, he passes out this video to all these parents and wives and all these different people. And I get all these like messages or feedback and about this video. And then so recently I watched it again and I was like, yeah, that's actually pretty good. But I don't have a lot of content dealing with the family. And one of the things that this episode talks about was like, explaining that the person, their son or their husband or whoever it is, they actually don't have the power to not pick up. And like, because the misconception out there that addicts and alcoholics make a bad choice and they keep making the choice, and the addict alcoholic 9 times out of 10 thinks they make that choice, so they create more guilt and shame, more spiritual malady with more of a need to use, rendering them more powerless. People don't understand. So this video has been getting great traction as I explain, like, these people don't have the power to choose. And it's like, okay, well, what's the solution? Well, you don't really have a solution as a parent, as a husband of a wife who's an addict or alcoholic. Like, there's not really much of a solution, right? They got to burn their life down. You can do interventions. You can do a few little things. You can, pull the money. You can do certain things to try. And maybe one of those things might shake them awake if they're homeless for a week or whatever. You talk about being shaken awake. And or maybe the wife leaves them, or the parents don't talk to them. These things can sometimes shake someone awake, and then they'll accept help. And once they go get help, then they start learning about their disease. But like my dad went to help my brother years ago out in Winnipeg, and I was like, Dad, no human power, bro. Like, you're not going to be able to do anything. And he's like, son, if your brother died and I didn't at least try, I don't know if I could live with myself.
That's fair.
And I get that part,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, it's understandable, but the life he had out there was brutal.
My dad.
Oh, yeah. Like, he was along for the ride, man. I mean, what he did is the equivalent of me going down to the bar, man, and trying to pull you off the bar stool. And I get it, because if that was a regular sponsee, obviously not. But when there's friendship involved, or there's relation involved, you know, like actual, you know, son, sibling, whatever, you know, that's where it gets emotional, and it gets difficult. And you know that you're dealing with that with your brother who's doing better today.
Right. So a lot of family members ask, like, what can I do? It's like, not much. And like, the advice that I want to give them is advice that I would use as a sponsor, and I wouldn't give money. I'm done letting you sleep on my couch. You got to go get help, and I got to take the position that for my own well-being, I can't care. Although I do care and I want to care, I can't care. And hopefully you find a bottom sufficient to promote change in you, but I have to kind of worry about my own well-being in my own life. That's a hard pill to swallow for a mom or a dad or a brother or a sister or a spouse to do that. So I can't even like give that advice like confidently, because the real risk of this guy is death. And I don't want to be the blame for that. So I often don't give a lot of advice. I'll give both sides of the advice. I'll give them all the chips, and you got to make your own choice. Any thoughts?
I think that's a pretty good approach. But, you know, when I think about this, I think about, you know, with it, there goes the annihilation of all things worthwhile in life, and engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers, brings fierce misunderstanding, resentment, you know, warp lives of blameless children. I always love that piece. And this piece is talking about cancer, right? And not so with the alcoholic illness. And so it goes into that, right? And so when you look at, you know, when a man has cancer, all are sorry for him. No one is angry or hurt. And so, well, why is that? Okay. Well, you know, if somebody has cancer, you blame the cancer. All those feelings, by the way, are actually still there. Because if this is a terminal illness, this individual will pass away. And there will be financial insecurity, and there will be fierce resentment against the cancer. There will be warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents, but it's directed at the cancer. Well, if you look at the alcoholic, who's it directed to? Is it directed to Jim, the alcoholic, or alcoholism?
To Jim, because they don't understand.
Always. So all that, like, you know, all that misunderstanding, all the fierce resentments, all of that is directed to Jim himself. So I'd say, just as a base understanding, that's kind of what that is like, you know, it is to the individual, kind of like morally. It's like the morals of the individual is askew. Because if you were a man, you can't stop drinking for your family, for your kids, for your career, for that. You know, it's not alcoholism that gets blamed, much like cancer. It's the individual male. So I think, the base of the conversation needs to be, I think, redirected so that we're really both talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we're talking about a terminal illness if the man be the real deal alcoholic.
Right.
No different than a stage 4 cancer type of situation.
Yeah, dude. But people just don't understand that. And their old belief, or their ingrained indoctrination belief of what they think it is, and that it's actually Jim. It's not the drink. If he really wanted to stop for his wife or his kids or his job, he could, and he would. He chooses not to. Like, breaking that, how do you suppose somebody helps break that within the family? Take them through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous? Show them their true predicament.
Well, I mean, I would say, like, if you have a general knowledge of the book itself and the first number of chapters, like, it is actually more about alcoholism. That is the chapter that is really kind of touted as that chapter for understanding for the employer, for the, you know, medical fraternity, for the wife.
To the wives, yeah.
So just understanding that chapter and being able to work it into a conversation. And then, of course, he's a sick man, right? And then from there, really working with others.
So it's
meeting a man through the family and a lot of those pieces.
So you're describing, you know, in a general way, take these chapters and explain it to the family, which is what I do. But a lot of these people, because all of my knowledge, almost all of my knowledge comes through the 12-step book, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the practical application applied in my life and how I see this working maybe in a step 1 with somebody who can't get sober in somebody else's life, or somebody who gets step 1 and then lives the rest of the program in their life. So it comes all from this spiritual program of action of the 12 steps. But then when I go into like a regular community or family, they're so entrenched with the medical fraternities' ideologies on addiction, right? Or whatever they found on YouTube. And a big one is like Gabriel Mate is huge on just trauma and not selfishness and not dishonesty and not these other things, which are huge. And me and you both know, and we both know that it's not all just trauma. A lot of it stems from trauma. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but so these people are like, it's hard to explain some of the stuff that I have as data to give to them because they already have a wrong base or a misconstrued base of what they think addiction is based on whatever they learned through the world of material, online, Gabriel Mate, some of these books. So it's a hard sell too.
Well, I guess it really depends on like the basis of the conversation, right? Like, do they know all? Because clearly not.
No.
It's not obviously working. And why are you even there having the conversation? Right? So like if they're open for you to have the conversation, I mean, not to say that I would cut down trauma, but I would say if it is trauma, the ones who have trauma, you know, have a chance at actually being like, hey, there's some things in my past that maybe make sense as to why I'm an alcoholic. Well, what about the guy who has not a damn thing? Like, the whole trauma idea really, really bugs me, man. Because there's some guys that I've worked with that like, really, dude, very vanilla. You know, like upper middle class, you know, played hockey, popular, you know, Camaro was his first car. Like you look at it, dude, you're just like...
Loving parents.
Ideal, dude. Ideal. And if it is trauma, you're fucked, right? You're screwed. If it is like the idea seems to be that you drink because you're trauma, that's why you drink. Right? And so if we just reduce that trauma or help that trauma, then in turn you no longer drink. How long they've been trying to work on that, dude?
Dude, I know.
But that's like, you know, if you are, you know, a population that has a lot of trauma, right? Then okay. But what if no trauma? You know, and like, yeah, sure, there's always maybe one or two things, but we're not talking apples to oranges. We're not talking like, let's say that guy that is pretty vanilla, maybe he had a teacher in grade 3 dress him down in front of the class, you know, and yeah, okay, maybe that's traumatic for him. Maybe we could chat about that, but that's not the same as another man who's sexually assaulted when he was younger.
Yeah.
You know, that's not apples to apples. It's not, you know, well, his trauma is, you know, his pain and that type of stuff. And it's like, yeah, dude, you can't measure a man's pain, but don't fucking kid me. Don't joke me around saying that it's because that he was dressed down in grade 3 as to why he drank. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and so he was sexually assaulted. His father was an abuser, all this other stuff. And that's why you drink. You know, don't get me wrong. It doesn't help.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, I've had some things happen in my life, but I'm not a byproduct of those things, nor, you know, do those things have any control, nor are they really even a fabric of who, they're not even a piece, like a puzzle piece that makes up the full picture of who I am, you know? And the only time a lot of those things get revisited is to help the newcomer. That's it.
I will say a trauma piece that we don't consider trauma would be ideologies of the society and the environment we live in.
Well, that's interesting.
Because if it goes against the core of your nature of who you are, it can actually traumatize your spirit. So, like, you don't live up to a standard in society. So I'll use myself when I was in, elementary school. I wasn't very smart. And the thing in school is you got to be smart. You want to pass, and you want to be popular, and you want to do these things. And part of that is like you got to pass your grades. Dude, I was like a 55% average in elementary, and I was cheating and copying off of other people, junior high also, right? And so I felt a lot of shame because I wasn't as smart or efficient with the mind as the people around me. So it was an ideology that I didn't live up to, that was indoctrinated on me, and it created me shame. So the subconscious doesn't care how it builds shame. It can build it on false ideologies, which many people do, okay? And then they act out also in this world of the material to kind of medicate some of the ideologies and get what it is they think they want. So they act a certain way, which causes them guilt. So guilt and shame are actually, they're manufactured through the environment for the ego to try to be accepted, is kind of what happens. But the other way to get shame is to actually dishonor yourself. So I punch Johnny out because the peer pressure's on me. And I don't want to punch Johnny because I'm a loving and kind human. That's the true nature. But now I just help myself be conditioned to punch Johnny because now I'm accepted. Yeah. And now I'm punching Johnny's for the next 20 years. And then it becomes part of my daily life, in a sense. So I think part of trauma is me trying to live up to ideologies that actually dishonor the core of who I am. And when you look up the definition of shame, it is dishonoring one's own consciousness. So I think that's a big part of it. And I call those like the mini traumas. But they're not really mini traumas because they really affect your soul. They affect your spirit, eh? But I think, I'd like to do another episode one day, talk about traumas specifically. Maybe pull up someone's book, or maybe we can watch YouTube, or I don't know, but kind of talk more about this trauma. I'd also like to talk more about young people, like your soon-to-be wife works at a youth addictions facility, and these people are really young. And we don't talk a lot about like under 18 addicts or alcoholics and blah, blah, blah. And, I'd really like to talk more about that. The other thing I'd like to mention to our listeners is Jesse and I are talking about him coming on and doing a hosting spot on the UDRcast on a live stream. Some of these episodes would probably make the regular releases of, the numbered releases, but a lot of my content that's going to be coming out will just be in its own playlist on YouTube. And a lot of those live streams will be there. But Jesse will be making like a regular appearance. We're just trying to work some things out right now. I would like him to. He just brings so much value. And now that you've seen his face, get used to it. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think, diving more into the traumas at some point is good. I just don't really, just the whole focus on it. Right?
Yeah.
Because the whole focus on it in turn is like, you're this way because your father, or you're this way because that event, and your whole identity, man, is that event or what happened to you when you were a kid. Like the whole thing just really, because the point really it's
that's a worship, that's a worship. You're worshiping that thing. And it defines you.
Well, it defines you. Like that's the whole. Like, you don't get away from it. No. You don't grow from it. No. And I think that's really what gets me so really fucking mad about it, honestly. Like,
You're catering to the self-pity and the victim mentality of that,
dude,
right?
it never ends. Like that's the thing is that like really like I am just gonna make sure that you come into this office once a goddamn week for the rest of your fucking life, and you ain't going nowhere, man. That's really what it is. You are never going to be independent from this event or from your childhood or from whatever happened to you. And, this book and this program, like Kelly, she knows a thing or two about my childhood. Definitely not the whole thing, but she knows enough to understand. She kind of knows what she needs to know to understand who I am or to better understand me as I am today. And, she's gone through all the education, masters, the whole 9 yards. And I remember years back when she was learning a lot of this stuff, she's like, you shouldn't be the way that you are, as per society and as per the medical fraternity, you should be absolutely fucked. And boy, do I ever love hearing that. You imagine? You imagine if that's what it was? That was the only option. And I can't stress that enough. And fuck, man, I mean, I think it took me years to fully understand that. As per society, as per that fraternity, I mean, I should be in an endless cycle, man. They should really be sticking a needle in my arm in some public housing on welfare. And that should be it. That should have been the life had it not been for this process. And so, I think it's so interesting too, because naturally you think, and I thought this, and I think, definitely a lot of men think this when they come in, that, you have to become disciplined and you have to, accept this way of life and a spiritual solution. And naturally, the way that it's almost like you can't really present that without the man believing that I am servant to this thing. Well, what am I really servant to? Because the other way that I just described, that's me servant to the substance, which that power is extremely limited.
Well, and you're also servant to the trauma.
Yeah.
You're serving the trauma. You're a slave to the trauma.
Well, I'd say like this is kind of like, without this process, fucking forget about the trauma, dude, because I'm still, you know what I mean? I'm still tuned up on whatever, and there's no talk about trauma. I'm just tuned right up on the government fucking dole, right?
Right.
Which is where we're at now, but... I really can't stress that enough, because I'd probably say it really hit me about 5 years in that's the way that it should be. And I think it really shook me more to my core. That scares me more than being homeless, honestly. Because when I was homeless, I knew, that this was wrong. But if you put me in public housing and you give me free dope and all this other shit, I could probably justify it away.
And honestly, I'm in the same boat to some degree. Maybe I didn't have as many terrible things happen to me as maybe you or some other even Indigenous people. But the likelihood of an Indigenous person becoming heavily addicted to substances, it's high, right? And, per capita, based on different nationalities, the likelihood of me going to jail or living on the streets or whatever, it's super high too. So it's this program that has allowed me to rid myself and not blame the world, not blame my skin color, not blame the church and everybody else, and get healthy. It's through the process, right? Again, similar to you, a little different, but same idea. And I could have worshipped that my whole life, right? But what's the point?
The personal responsibility aspect.
Yeah, dude.
That's the biggest thing. That's the real stuff, man.
Yeah. And by no means are we disregarding somebody's trauma. That's not what we're doing here, right? But a lot of that trauma-specific focus, it actually caters to the trauma, caters to the self-pity, caters to the victim, and that's not helpful.
Yeah, the martyrdom, the selfishness. Yeah.
And then it caters to the blame of whoever did this to you. Like, I remember when Lucy, my daughter, went to some counseling after I destroyed our family. Lucy was messed up for a while, right? And she had to go to counseling. And she was telling the counselor all these things. And the counselor was like, yeah, blame your dad, pretty much. Lucy and Shannon had to take her out of counseling because this counselor was blaming me for Lucy and everything. And I've run into many people who said that that's what they do. They try to get the blame on somebody, and then let's work this out, me and you, through talking. Like you said, for the next 100 years, come here and let's talk.
We'll give you some pills.
But Lucy wasn't getting better.
No.
The best they ever got, bro, was when they did the 12 steps. Shannon, Lucy, Jillian, the best they've ever been is in the 2-year frame where they all did the steps. You ask them. They're not doing bad now, but they're not like involved in it like they were then.
Yeah.
And they were doing so good. It's an amazing thing what we got here.
No doubt.
Anyway, so in the meantime, before we get this live stream stuff sorted out, where it would be me and you one day, you your own, something like that, you on your own, a couple weeks later, me and you on your own, doing guests, whatever you want to do. Before we get that going, which is I'm still working with my my few people to try to figure out everything because there's lots of moving parts. But until then, let's just keep getting you on. And that should be ready to roll, I'm going to say, within a couple months. But, yeah, thanks for coming out, bro, on short notice.
Okay, Billy.
It's a good time, eh?
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
It was definitely a good chat.
Can you say that again?
What's that?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me. You've been looking for a thank you from me your whole life, eh?
Okay, everyone. Over and out. Have a great night.